Good afternoon and a warm welcome to our honourable guests, the honourable attendees joining us from all over Africa and beyond our borders as well on our virtual platform. I am Zanella Morrison, and today through a series of panel discussions and fireside conversations with industry leaders, we'll examine how women have long been central to Africa's progress, yet systemic barriers such as power imbalances, deep-seated social norms and structural inequalities continue to limit their full participation in economic and political life. Despite numerous policies, gender disparities persist, slowing Africa's economic transformation. These sessions are going to review key highlights of ACET's newest gender-focused report, the fourth African Transformation Report on Gender Equality, and the African Women's Inclusion Index, as well as the recommendations that come with a view of socializing the report and igniting policy conversations so we advance gender equality and inclusion in Africa. To help us better understand this report as well, I want to welcome Dr. Theophiline Bosse-Duke, Senior Economist at ACET, with some key findings and recommendations that have come from the report.
Before we start, let me ask a question. Can gender equality drive Africa's economic transformation? It's a debate we've had for years. The truth? It's complicated. It depends on the level of economic transformation, gender equality, and how these two things interact. ACET's latest research, the African Transformation Report and the African Women's Inclusion Index, reveals that with deliberate action from governments and policymakers, gender equality and economic transformation can reinforce each other. When African countries take intentional action on gender equality, their economies grow stronger, more competitive, and more resilient. So today, let's explore why gender inclusion matters for economic transformation. The good news is Africa has made progress. Between 2011 and 2022, the continent's average gender inclusion score, which measures 4 dimensions: law, leadership, financial inclusion, and economic inclusion, improved from 45.6 to 53.5 out of 100. But here's the challenge. At this pace, African women will wait for full economic and financial inclusion until 2093. Yes, 2093. That's 63 years after AU's African Women's Decade ends. Clearly, progress is too slow. But here's what the research tells us. Countries that take gender-inclusive policy action, like Rwanda and Mozambique, see faster economic progress. Closing the gender productivity gap in agriculture alone could increase Africa's output by 19%. Africa's innovation and export value rise when women participate equally in STEM, manufacturing, and trade. The takeaway: gender inclusion fuels transformation, but only if we are intentional about it. For years, we've talked about empowering women, but empowerment alone is not enough. The real game changer is shared power. Here's why this matters. Women's access to leadership remains low. Only 6 countries score above 80 out of 100 on women's leadership, while 25 remain below average. Legal progress doesn't always mean real change. Africa scores 72 out of 100 in law and legal rights, but weak enforcement means women still struggle with access to land, finance, and fair wages. The solution? Intentional policies that go beyond paper and translate into real opportunities. Some African countries are proving that change is possible. Gabon reformed its legal system, allowing women to own property and work without male approval. Kenya and South Africa expanded digital finance access, significantly increasing women's economic participation. Ethiopia and Cote d'Ivoire are investing in women's businesses and labor market reforms for women. When gender inclusion is a policy priority, economic transformation accelerates. Africa's future is not about choosing between gender equality and economic transformation. It's about making intentional choices to ensure both. Gender equality isn't only about fairness, and it isn't only for women. Societies and economies where power is shared benefit everyone: women, men, boys, and girls. The time for shared power is now.
Thank you, Dr. Theophiline Bosso-Duker, Senior Economist at ACET, for setting the tone for the rest of today's online event, highlighting some of the key elements we will touch back on and the complexity behind the implementation of policy and changes in financial system. But let's move swiftly along to the next agenda item, and I'd love to welcome to join us for this conversation the CEO of ACET, Mavis Owusi-Gyamfi, for high-level opening a dialogue with Her Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, Jane Opoke-Egyeman. This is the first female Vice President of Ghana and an inspiration to so many young girls in Ghana and across the continent. So welcome to both of you. Mavis, this is your conversation. Over to you.
Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Oh, this is very important too.
Thank you.
I need to pay attention to it. Yes.
Excellent. And I know gender is close to your heart. So let me start with my first question. You are Ghana's female vice president. We hope the first of many. As women that hail from Ghana, you and I, it was really heartbreaking to see where Ghana falls on the ACET African Women Inclusion Index. So although overall we scored 56.1 out of 100, we went down 2 points between 2017 and 2022. We do really well on the legal side. We got 74.6 out of 100. But when it actually comes to implementation of those legislation, we don't do as well. So for example, we only scored 34.4 on financial inclusion and women's participation economically. And rather sadly, we are regressing when it comes to female leaders in Ghana. So where do you think we are going wrong? You know, what are we not getting right in Ghana and in the rest of Africa so that we can ensure that we course correct and we start to see real representation? You know, at the moment, everybody is very excited because you've been elected. Everybody got excited because I was appointed head of ACET. Everybody gets excited every time a woman is appointed. What do we need to do right to make sure that appointment like ours is the norm in Africa and not the exception we celebrate?
Thank you so much for your question. I also wish that we get to a level where it doesn't matter who becomes a vice president. We've had them before, and nobody said they were male. Vice chancellors, we've had them. Surgeons, name them. So the reason that people are excited is because we are not the norm.
Yes.
Okay, so we need to establish that. So I also share with you that we need to get to a level where this is not strange. This is just so because it is so. That we go through the same path as everyone else. So it begs the question, if that is the case, why are we so invisible? The reasons are many, as you and I know. And you see, it is not just the culture that we like to blame. One of the things in time past I wasn't happy about was to attend so many conferences on women, on gender, and you leave very depressed. You leave as if there's nothing you can do. Because all we do is to focus on our challenges, to focus on the negativity, as if nobody ever did anything. Would we as a continent be here if women had done nothing? It was a male who said to educate, a male from my culture, an Akan culture, which is matrilineal. It was a male who said, if you educate a woman, you educate a nation. What made him say that? Well, you see, if we want to see what we have gone wrong, let me quote Achebe. He says we need to find out where the rain began to beat us. And I think the rain began to beat us when we abandoned our own ways of seeing, of analyzing, of understanding, and use metrics that have nothing to do with us. Okay? Assuming every time we kept our women in history who have achieved a lot, the young people don't even know. Okay? Are women in politics? Are women in architecture, in medicine? What have women not done on this continent? Where are they? In what presentations do we even remember? So the question would be, so what went wrong? I had a chat with young people only yesterday. They were asking the same. I said, "Look, we shouldn't talk about, the Fourth Republic. Listen, we've been here for a long time. The struggle for independence, that's not our history only, even though these are significant milestones. How far have we traveled? You think if there were no women participation, slavery would have ended? At what point did we get here? Because of imposition, because we abandoned our own ways of seeing, because of all the copying in thought, in action, implementation. My sister, we've been at it forever. It's not going anywhere. Okay? It is not going anywhere. And it's not our culture. There's no perfect culture anywhere. All the countries we think have done well. And please, let's go easy on Africa. We know some countries are doing well. Whenever we generalize that the whole country, the whole continent is not going anywhere, it will not go anywhere. Where are the examples we can learn from? What are some countries doing that we think are good that we can replicate? How did they get there that others are not getting there? What has been our history? Our history, especially to do with education. And I started just a few examples. I don't know if you went to university here in this country. You never did. If you had, you'd have known that at my own University of Cape Coast, the smallest hall or residence was for the women. The same in Legon, Volta, the same in KNUST, Africa. So how did we progress there? You have to go back. Who brought this thing we call education? And for whom was it meant? Before then, listen, we have had no history of women sitting idle doing nothing. We don't have it. We haven't had the history of this. Every woman has been active. Were we dying of hunger when these people came here? Is that in their memoirs? Read the original memoirs and see what they saw about us. So what systems were put in place now to put us here that we are lost? We need to go back and study that history properly and remove those obstacles. It seeped into our language. And I blame religion and I blame education. These are the two pillars that have brought us here. What did they teach us? That women can't. Is it in our language? And even those who do research in our culture, do you know what they do? They'll go into the Proverbs and pick all the negative ones. I lie, as Ghanaians will ask. Pick all the negative ones and show that's the culture. You don't believe in yourself. You don't have any sense of worth. You don't have any sense of identity. You think even what is beautiful comes outside of yourself. How can you progress? So there's work we need to do. We have just passed the affirmative action. Passing the laws and the policies won't do it. We don't lack 30% of women in any profession in this country. Why are they not stepping forth? Why are they invisible? The reasons are many. You and I know some. Only this morning, I found some 2 hours. Sometimes when I find 1 hour, I go to my memoirs. And I've crafted my memoirs as a conversation with my mother, whose own dreams were shut down because at the time, a priest told her father, who was a fisherman, that, if your daughter goes far and so on and so forth. And I said, Ma, those priests are still here. They are in our relationships. They are in our workplaces. That, we know why we don't step out. You groom somebody, you mentor somebody. Now the boyfriend is saying something different. Who is that boyfriend? Where is he going? Do you get it? You see life on our campuses. You have come here as a student and you've turned yourself into a chef. I fought with them on campus throughout my life, from being hall warden to being dean, whatever, to being vice chancellor. You see, we know what stops us. If in our culture, if it's the culture that stops women, we should have no women queen mothers who have their own way of participating in the judiciary of their constituents or constituencies rather. How did we get here? We know, so we need to ask ourselves, where did the rain begin to meet us? No culture is perfect, as I said. Okay? So we need to do serious research into our own past and keep it in view for the young girls to see that, listen, we have not always been at the bottom. We've been up there before. But when people come with their religion about woman and Adam and a whole lot of things, it's not encouraging. And when the education system comes for the boys and not the girls, when in our own traditional way, boys and girls were educated. We say somebody has dropped out. She's learning with her mother in the market. Why did she drop out? She's learning. We call her dropout. How is she going to step out? Or step up for that matter? So you see, my sister, we have work to do.
Oh, Madam Vice President, I agree with you. And I love the fact that you are asking us to go back to history. As an Ashanti woman, I grew up in a house where I was told the power of Ya Santua. I was told the power of queen mothers. I was told the power of women. My grandmother, a market trader, is a real representation of the power of Ashanti women. So I agree with you that we must go back in history. We must look at what women did. And we must also look at what women are achieving now and ensure we are communicating it and celebrating it. But having said all of this, I still want to push you a bit. You still had to navigate the educational system that we have, the colonial education system. You still had to navigate it. You still had to go through the processes of perceptions that women are secondary to men. And yet, in spite of it all, you became our first vice chancellor. You became Minister of Education. You are now vice president. What challenges did you encounter and how did you overcome this? Just to give me and all the young ladies on this call a sense of how not to let what looks like hurdles stop you from realizing your ambition.
My fair lady, do you have the whole day?
No.
Do you have a whole week non-stop?
We'll have to follow it up later, but a brief one.
Listen, I don't even know where to begin because it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe my own childhood also plays a role. I grew up in a home where I didn't know there was something girls couldn't do or boys couldn't do. Okay. No, my mother, my parents, we all clean after ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's how I raised my own children. So nobody cleans after you. Okay. We were both sent to school, boys and girls. Nobody was left out because you were a boy or you were a girl. And I think what helped me also was that I went to a girls' school, a girls' boarding school, a girls' secondary school. So you couldn't tell me that girls can't do physics. I've seen them do physics. You see, you can't say girls don't do maths. I just thought, well, you are good in maths or you're interested in maths, but I never associated any gender with it because I didn't have any space to do that. Okay. So when later on I go to the ministry and the girls are not performing well in maths, I need to find out. And I go beyond the statistics. What is happening? How are you teaching this girl at this age with this kind of psychology? Shouldn't you be using a different method? What should you be doing? Okay. And so the first middle school I went to, I keep saying, I was in the primary school, I didn't even know whether I was a boy or a girl. So that didn't matter to me. I was just there. And so when it was the serious one, let me say, was when I went to the university. And I suppose I was so old then for anybody to tell me what I can do and what I cannot do.
Like that.
You see? So when you ask what were the challenges, yes, there'll be many challenges, even in the lecture theater. Because there were a few ladies in the class at the time, when you want to make your voice heard, the boys will be shouting. Did you bring me to the university? Do I owe you anything? So why should you stop me from making my point? You know? So I think those were very helpful. The challenges will be many. Listen, look at all establishment. When we say a board of 5, one of which must be a woman, you see there's only one woman. There's never a case where 4 are women and 1 is male. See? It's all about the perceptions. It's all about our invisibility and the many challenges that stop us from moving forward. A lot of it has to do with our self-confidence. You know, that's a very big issue. And we need to face it. Who are we? As I said, that's what the history comes in. Who are the other women who've come before us? If today we are complaining about challenges, let us imagine the challenges that somebody like Mabel Dagdan faced when she became the first woman to run on her own merit and get into parliament. What do you think were her challenges? She got there. There are Nijages, and so the names are many. They all got there. And if today we have challenges, I can't imagine what challenges they have. I was applying for the vice chancellorship, and I think that was the first major one I got. You know, moving up the ladder at the university, I think in a way was easy for me in the sense that becoming a head of department, maybe I was the only one who qualified. So even though I was the only woman among them, you know, yes, so that was it. When I joined the faculty, I told my, that's the first fight I had with my head of department. And listen, saying we should have a departmental meeting at 4, that time is for my children. You, when you finish, now I was telling him that, listen, I don't have a wife. You have a wife. So when you finish the meeting, go and drink your beer and you get home. There's food for you. I have to go and cook for my family. Okay? So we have to change the time. I said I can teach back to back from beginning to about 2:30. My day is done. That time onward is for my children, and there's no compromise on that. So you see, and a lot of the men, I don't think it's because they want to be mean or anything. They just hadn't thought about it. They just haven't thought about it. So instead of confronting them in an argument and a fight, sit down quietly and explain the situation to them. Most of them come around. Let me confess, some of my strongest support from my undergraduate days till today are male. Okay? So I don't see the males as my enemies. Okay? So I'm at the university. I've been there all my life. I've seen many things we could do differently. Most of the time, I happen to be the only woman on the board. Whatever I took to the position of vice chancellor and the successes we got, they were not new. I had said them ad nauseum, and nobody was minding me. So I applied because I thought, no, this position would give me the space to do the things I've been talking about. So there I was in competition with 5 males, including my pro-VC. Nobody gave me a chance. We are not ready for a woman. Really? Did we ever say we're ready for a man? Or nobody even thought we were worth asking that question? Yeah. So as for the obstacles, they will come in many, many forms. You have to believe in what you are doing and go for it. And then also recognize that every choice has its benefits. It also has its downside. Okay? You decide to stand out, or others that you are standing out, they will react in all kinds of ways. Okay? Men and women. Okay? They will react in all kinds of ways. And don't think that one gender is coming to support you because you belong to that gender. I have found painfully at many levels that is not the case. Because you see, we are all down there. And I think it's a natural human reaction. So I don't blame it. We are all down there struggling. And now you are up there. There has to be something with you.
Of course.
So the name calling starts.
Mm.
It was a woman who said we will give her wrong information because she had joined the administrative staff. Can you imagine? So you see, you have to believe in what you want to do, and you know the downsides will come, the name calling, so many things. But then it depends on what you think is important. If they are not ready for a woman, nobody asks a woman if you are ready for men. So
I like
don't give
it. So, but we
don't give it that.
Okay, I love that. I love the fact that we never asked if we were ready for men, but the men
Can you
still
imagine?
took. I agree. I would love to continue this conversation for
Forever,
a much
but
longer.
we don't have forever.
I have to
No
come.
problem.
I have to find the time, but I want to ask you one last question before I sign off, and which is, President Mahama speaks so highly of you as an equal partner on his leadership journey to reset Ghana. Now, this is something that has come up very strongly in our report, the importance of shared power between men and women. And one of the things that we found was that there isn't enough data to show the benefit of shared power. So is the issue a lack of data, or is it something else? And if so, how do we get?
Many things. It's not just like, what is data? Data is information, isn't it? It can be statistical, it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. So it's never one thing. We've all come to become very fixated on the figures. But you see, so many things go on too that may not necessarily be captured in how many women here and how many men there. Those are the gaps we need to pay attention to. Why would he say that? I worked with him when he appointed me as a Minister for Education. And it came to me as a surprise because I was at UCC. I had finished my term as Vice Chancellor. I was heading elsewhere. So I was wondering why me? So it told me that maybe people are watching what you are doing when you don't know that they're watching you. I came to the ministry. I had a long conversation with him, and he pledged his support, and he never turned his back on me. All of us who believe, who think we are happy that we have a woman vice president in Ghana, must thank Mahama. If he didn't have that courage, if he didn't step out, I don't know what obstacles he faced.
Yeah.
But also thinking, yes, we need to thank him. Without him nominating me, I wouldn't be here. You get it?
I do. I do.
Maybe I make my positions very clear at the beginning, what I'm walking into. And I did that in education. So, not that I'm rigid or anything, but I just want you to understand. I'm here. I think you have paid me respect by bringing me here. I need your support in going forward. These are my ideas. Okay?
I hear you. I hear you. And if I may be cheeky and say, you have my support, big sister. Madam, you have my support. It has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you very much, Madam Vice.
Thank you too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Mavis, what an incredible conversation. We honor you and we really appreciate the insights. I want the book and I want to be part of the next conversation. Madam Vice President of Ghana, Jane Opoku Egiman, thank you so much. Mavis, the CEO, thank you for this incredible conversation. It's going to lead us straight into the next panel discussion. And the topic for it is Beyond Stereotypes, Shifting Power for Gender Equality. Now, this topic will explore some of the structural barriers we are seeing in an equal power dynamics, social norms that are discriminatory laws that really hinder women's inclusion and gender equality. We also want to examine some of the challenges that impact economic transformation, look at strategies, how women can overcome and drive meaningful change in the spaces that they are in. So to help me drive this conversation, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists. The first one is Her Excellency Monica Gyengos, the former First Lady of Namibia. And and Emma Theophilus, Minister of ICT in Namibia. We then are also joined by Crystal Simeoni, the director of the AfriFirm Macroeconomics Collective, the Nawi Collective. Please look up their bios. So incredible, the journeys that they have walked and their accomplishments. But I want to start straight in and perhaps ask the very first question. And I want to ask the question into you, Her Excellency Monica, to look at maybe giving us the time to diagnose the problem a little bit, looking at barriers to power and inclusion. What are your thoughts around the key findings we see in the report and the perceptions that women aren't capable often to impact women's opportunities to lead? You've been such a vocal advocate for women's leadership, and you've broken those harmful stereotypes. What did it take to dismantle it, and what are some of the steps we can continue to take?
It takes a very thick skin, because it's not a stereotype, it's a mindset. So the mindset says that women shouldn't be here. And because the mindset says that, it creates all kinds of stereotypes to delegitimize your presence. So it's not one harmful stereotype, it's a harmful mindset that really objectifies women and questions your presence. So say, for instance, we talk about, let's include quotas, then the discussion becomes about merit. But the merit discussion should be ubiquitous. It should be about male and gender being competent. Don't we all want a public sector where male and female participants are competent? And that's a way of delegitimizing your presence. Another way of delegitimizing the presence of women is really asking, how did she get here? Who did she sleep with? Who does her husband know? It's never about your merit in terms of how you got there on your own. It's what is the sneaky mechanism that you use. So it's really about dismantling these mindsets and also speaking to men about gender equality is an ask. It's an ask to share power. It's not an ask for you to be disempowered. And this sharing of power doesn't take anything away from you, it adds to you, because what it does, it creates a fair society. And fair societies de-risk future generations. Our children benefit from fair society. So gender equality really benefits both male and female.
And it's incredible the things you say. Speaks to what the Vice President as well. When you ask that same question, you would not ask it to a male. You would not ask how a male got there, what they had to do to get there. They somehow got there, and it's adequate. So it's a reminder to double check the things that we think of. Now, we also have the backbone of policy that goes in tandem with cultural norms. Again, this was highlighted earlier on. Countries in the world where there's a large gap between those who hold power and the constituents they represent is problematic. So policies cannot be properly implemented if this gap is so huge. I want to perhaps move on to the next question around your experience as a young woman, Honorable Emma Theophilus, your experience as a young woman on those who hold power, and what is their role to implement these policies effectively? And how have you paved the way for yourself? But what are you seeing now that you are there that still needs to be done to ensure that power is applied properly for the benefit of society?
Well, I think my journey to getting to the position I have now as a young woman in political leadership and holding a ministerial position started with a he for she, a man who had the courage to give opportunities to women in general, but more importantly, opportunities to young women. And me becoming a deputy minister was the confidence of one man, our late President Hagejik Inkob, who then actually took that leap of faith. Because I can tell you, he faced a lot of criticism for trusting an entire ministerial position to a 23-year-old young woman. But nonetheless, he took that decision and he stood by it. But before that, it requires a lot of activity in political spaces. It requires being policy adjacent and ensuring that one actually has some level of understanding how government works. But of course, yes, the gap is still big. We still have a large number of women not in political spaces, a large number of young people in general, let alone young women in political spaces. And many people are still trying to get used to the idea of a young woman under the age of 25 or 30 or even 35 heading a ministerial position or heading a political office. And you see it in the way people interact with you as a young leader. You see it in the way they address you, the type of nuanced jokes they make sometimes, all geared towards, their unfamiliarity with the notion of you being in that position. But I can say in Namibia, it has drastically changed. We are seeing more women in positions of power. We are seeing more young women in positions of power. However, there's still barriers of us holding that power because every other day you're being asked, when are you getting married? When are you having babies? But I've seen now, I have a younger male member of parliament who sits as a parliamentarian. Nobody's asking him when he's getting married. Nobody's asking him if he has children or when he's getting children. Nobody cares what he dresses on a Sunday or on a Wednesday morning. But somehow those questions always find themselves geared towards young women in politics. So there's really so much still to change. A paradigm shift still needs to happen. But finally, now it is not uncommon. It's becoming a commonality that people have to get used to it.
And what we've done is sort of set the groundwork from a political perspective to a broader dynamic. But ultimately as well, there's the economic aspect that policy has to start showing the fruits thereof. So I'd invite you, Ms. Simeone, to lean into economic power and policy failure, because we know that financial systems are the ones that ultimately we feel the most when they exclude women, and society feels them the most. Access to credit, wage gaps. So, and financial inclusion is scoring the lowest in the report. 25 out of 42 countries falling below the regional average. So, which one policy, in your view, we could fix that could have and help us to make the biggest leap to close the gap?
Thanks. So I'm going to complicate it a little bit and just start with saying it's extremely important to make sure we're using an intersectional approach to both understanding the problem as well as creating alternatives and solutions that can be used to rebalance current inequalities, but also make it just for all of us to live. And I'll give you an example. I don't usually work on land, but I just came back from the CSW in New York, and I was listening in on the presentation on Uganda and learned that only 13% of land title is in the hands of women. A little bit shocked at how low the figure was. So I looked up my own country, Kenya, and it sits at an unbelievable 1%. And I know through my own work that land is an important contributing factor to accessing credit, for example, because of collateral requirements by financial institutions. Yet, my community in the space of economic justice and feminist economic justice, I really hardly see any engagements with land justice movements. Yet, we know that these issues are so linked and so intertwined. So my point is the financial sector doesn't have the luxury of working alone. If we're looking at justice, it needs to work alongside other areas of intervention for real change to happen. And it needs to see life from different vantage points as well as pressure points. Which leads me to my final point. I know the kind of analysis and data that is collected and presented for policymakers usually doesn't really tell a complete picture, partly because of the roots of the technical analysis in the economic space, which is created to imagine that economics is ahistorical, is apolitical, and not gendered. Yet we know and we live through the knowledge that this is very, very far away from the truth. And the findings of this ACET report show that really, really well. And so more data that is gendered, or not just gendered disaggregation of quantitative figures, but qualitative data and knowledge is equally important. So what narratives are we using to shape the future? What narratives are we using to question what is existing? Those really, really matter.
And when we apply all of that, we've got to look at quite a number of markers, and that's what the report is doing, is trying to look at various markers by which we are looking at the progress or the lack of progress of women. And I want to add one more to our conversation, I think, for all of us to think about and to look at it from different aspects. And I'll ask that question to you, Honourable Theophilus, looking at the digital space. There again, my biggest concern and my worry is we say leave no one behind, but when women are beginning on such a back foot, how do we begin to make a concerted effort to create lasting change that'll help women to have access to digital as fast, if not faster, so that we catch up? As only 37% of women at the moment in sub-Saharan Africa have, for example, a financial account, compared to 48% of women, largely due to barriers in mobile phone ownership, internet access, as well as digital literacy. So yes, let's look from an ICT policy perspective. What is the gap there? And perhaps you can share with us some strategies that can help to improve women's access to digital solutions.
Absolutely. I think ICT policies are essential. ICT policies that are costed, that have implementation plans, that have budgets for implementation. I think that's the most important. And these policies need to address the gaps related to access, affordability, and quality. Because one can have, access to fiber line crossing through their village, crossing through their home. But if they cannot afford it, and if it's not of quality, they are unable to acquire it and properly use it. So I think the first one is looking at how we can subsidize whether telcos by reducing the taxes of the devices that we have in our countries, making them more affordable, making data more affordable, and making sure it's qualitative so that women can access it easier. But also we can look at putting together a mechanism that many countries are now adopting, and the International Telecommunications Union is actually so much for, which is the Universal Service Access Fund. So this fund sits with the state, and its role is to ensure it rolls out infrastructure in the last mile where many of the telcos do not want to go to because it doesn't make financial sense, or making sure the fund subsidizes the taxes otherwise would have been charged on devices being imported into our countries. Because the reality of the matter is most of our countries are importing these devices. We don't produce them in our own countries, and therefore they come at a higher cost than than at many parts of the world. But further, it doesn't matter then if somebody just has, what we call a dumb phone. We must encourage our citizens, and particularly women, to go online. Of course, making sure they know about the risks that come with going online and ensuring that there is some level of digital literacy, but ensuring that we reduce the cost of data in our countries to ensure that they're able to optimally use these online spaces, whether it's to transact, whether it's to advertise their businesses, whether it's to be connected to a support system in every facet of their lives. And all this starts with qualitative, accessible, and affordable ICT policies that are addressing these gaps.
And now when we take those policies, and I'm glad you make the example of telcos. I think we always look at telcos and we say they're responsible, they can do this, and restructuring policies around telcos. But there's two other very important players, and I want to ask you, Ms. Simeoni, to lean in on this. There's government and then as well as financial institutions. In your view, what are some of the actions that they can take to ensure that women can gain real economic power by unlocking digital solutions?
So I think the digital world exists in a world that has deep inequalities that need to be fixed first before we layer on the digital solutions as an approach. And I think a good way to begin is to begin investing in public services and public sector workers. This would mean universal access to childcare, for example, universal access to elderly care, which rebases the burdens that are put on women to socially reproduce the current system. You can layer that with digital solutions to make sure that happens with an ease, but the fundamentals of it happening still have to happen before any of that happens. Centering public provisioning also is really, really important. The idea that the state is central to development and development of African countries, and not letting market forces or the private sector dictate what developmental trajectory your countries take. So, for example, if, with the notion of the market forces having profit as the end result, if you have a mega highway as a mega infrastructure project versus a maternal care unit, most times investment will go into the mega highway rather than a maternal unit as a source of investment to get to a point of profit maximization. And so recentering the state in how we, provide for social services is really, really important. And lastly, expanding at the same time, as enforcing the law around equal pay, around sexual harassment, and this includes digital and technology-assisted harassment, around property rights and inheritance, and how can use technology to make sure that that happens in a, in a more just way. It's not enough to just have the law, but ensure the training of the law enforcement to ensure that the enforcement of these policies is really, really important. And so this means a budget allocation has to be made to ensure that that
The next question, I think I want Monica to really lean into. Monica, this is around leadership and economic empowerment. I think gender inequality is tied to wealth inequality. What economic reforms do you believe we can give women real power in Africa today, especially in terms of shifting the power dynamics and making sure that we are seeing lasting and impactful change when it comes to the power dynamics that we hold, so that we also as women drive the narrative ourselves?
So the first and obvious point is that representation matters. And I make this point because in two days' time, the armed forces in Namibia will be for the first time saluting a female commander-in-chief, first female president. And this is important because power at the very top matters. Because to do what my sister Crystal was talking about in terms of really looking at how the public purse behaves, it needs some big decisions. It needs some big ideas. And a big idea is to really look how we think about capital formation. On our continent, capital formation generally ends up in investment, ensuring that the wealthy become wealthier. And we must reimagine capital formation in a way that it becomes an enabler of an equitable economic framework. And there's many, many ways to do that. And I think my sister went through some of the ways in terms of prioritizing healthcare, in terms of prioritizing education, because that enables people who are in low-income populations to move into better income that enables them to build wealth. And the issues around income and wealth inequalities are very linked, but they are a little bit different. But let's think quickly about wealth accumulation and where state power for me can be utilized. And in any economy, in any country, the state procurement is one of the biggest drivers of economic development, what government spends its money on. But not just the what, also on the who. So if government would apply a policy to say that 30% of our procurement spend in any given sector has to be female-owned businesses, this can be consequential for wealth creation for female business owners. And obviously, I say this within the context that this is part of a broader attempt to de-risk female business entrepreneurship. Access to markets, integration into value chains, capacity building, whatever all of that is, doesn't become irrelevant to this point. But this point to me can be a quick, easy, low-hanging fruit that can be applied by any leader. And that's why I say representation matters, because this is a decision that requires political will, and it requires a leader who's willing to spend some political capital in ensuring that this leader is, that this kind of decision is implemented.
I've got a question from Dunsi Stroshine. I hope I've said that properly. She asks, in what ways do Western narrative impact African women? Now, we can look at this very differently, but I thought of it in many of our countries, we've had Western influence that has negatively impacted and, many of the cultures within our, she spoke about culture, she also spoke about religion and the impact of that. And now we are left with a narrative of women who do not remember that we were actually in those roles, that we led and we did incredible things as part of our community. So how can we ensure that there's that global gender advocacy perhaps that comes in and starts to help us to shift the mind shift of what the West has done, but also for us to remember who we were? So a bit of a question rolled into two, and perhaps I can ask that to you. Maybe Emma, how do you feel about taking the question for us to just have a look at the West, its influence, its impact, and what do we do now?
I think the biggest thing we can do is ensure we reclaim back the storylines around the contributions women have made in the modern world, on the African continent, and before that. And we need to say their names and we need to tell their stories. And I say this because as we are reflecting on ushering in our first elected female head of state, we find ourselves talking about the contributions around the gender policies that have now culminated into us finally having a female head of state in the country, where we have a parliament that is 50% women. But before that, we had a liberation struggle where we had women in refugee camps on the front lines as diplomats, but many a times these stories are not told. So I think we need to reclaim back the storytelling of women that have literally changed the dynamics in our society, that have changed the trajectory and the destinies of our countries. And if we do not do that, we'll continue to speak about it in an abstract form without actually pinpointing who these women are, what their storylines were, and what those contributions were to shaping the gains that we now have in many parts of our continent.
I appreciate that answer so much. Retell the stories and keep on retelling them so we know what good looks like. Ms. Simeone, I'm going to throw it to you for a quick wrap up on your part. And I want to pull on another question as well, is how do we amplify the lived experience and the difference between what we want to see and the current lived experience of women?
I think that's intertwined with the question that came from the audience. NAWI, the organization that I lead, is called NAWI, and NAWI is not an acronym. It's the name of the last known Dahomey Amazonian from current-day Benin. And so it's an ode to remembering the names of African women who history has invisibilized and erased. It's an ode to an anti-colonial struggle because they fought against the French. And so really it's up to us to continue to fight and to reclaim our memory. And as you know, as you were asking the question, and I'm sorry, I can go on about this for a long time because the work of NAWI is also to tell economic narratives that are Pan-African and that are feminist. My mother's Kenyan from a group called, an ethnic community called the Kikuyu, and they organized their societies around 5 values, which were honesty, generosity, justice, temperance, and courage. And I'm often questioning myself in terms of how do we build economies of care that center on some of those values, and how do we reclaim them for ourselves? How do we push back on the narratives that we've been told about ourselves, this Africa failure complex that Tandika Mukindawire spoke about and wrote about? How do we gain ourselves back? And I think that's something that we continuously need to be asking. It's Women's Month this month, and this is a question for us all as African sisters. And where do we find the hope for this to continue? The lived experiences are pushing back and resisting on what economic analysis in my sector of the world tells us it has to look like, read like, show up like. At NAWI, we make sure that we center beauty in the things that we do and in the publications that we produce. We center qualitative narratives and storytelling that will sometimes, or often many times, go beyond what quantitative data and metrics will tell. Our lives are not just numbers, but our lives are experiences, and we need to remember that. And these narratives, this qualitative data, is what we need to present to policymakers to remember that the real life reality of existence on this continent is complicated and complex. It happens all at once. I don't live SDG 3 today and SDG 5 tomorrow. They all happen to me at the same time. And so the response and solutions and alternatives need to be as complex. And life tells us that, tells us of this complexity. And it's also an act of reclamation for us to remember.
Excellent, Ikengos. I want to pose the final closing remark to you and ask you to reflect on self-belief in what is possible. How do we reignite within ourselves that belief?
I think by, I say this often. There's a quote by Audre Lorde that says, your silence doesn't protect you. And why it's important for particularly women in prominent positions to speak up for themselves is that it signals to other women that this is not okay. Something that has really surprised me in Women's Month is we've all been silently observing what's been happening in the Nigerian Senate between a senator and the Senate president, and none of us really want to wade into that. But one thing I can say is that how that situation makes us feel becomes important, because you don't want the essence of what the issue is, which is an allegation of sexual harassment, become dismissed and get distracted by all types of other procedural issues. So I think we must speak up on certain things. Women must speak up for themselves, because there's no prize, there's no benefit for a woman who speaks to this issue for herself. The benefit really is for other women. And the narrative that I'm starting to say to myself, as much as we fight for representation, I think we're fighting for future generations. And as women, we must also potentially understand that we will not necessarily bear the fruit of our fight. So when inclusion happens, when this window opens, we need to take the point that was made earlier, that women are a homogeneous group, or not a homogeneous group. We are different. And as these windows open, we must ensure it's intergenerational, that there's a mix of rural and urban, that there's a mix of everything, so that we have the value of diverse perspectives of different women, including women who stand up for themselves on topics that are not comfortable. And a topic that is very uncomfortable and costly for any woman is the issue of sexual harassment.
And you know, to close off, I think the conversation, and as we were engaging early on and having discussions, what we hear today, for me, I find a lot of hope in the fact that we are fighting, that we are now having conversations that perhaps 10 years ago we did not have the platforms or the environments to have. We've made progress. We are making progress. And your views and opinions today and the contribution of the panel is really helping us to just encapsulate what kind of progress we've made and where we are at today and what the struggle is asking of us going forward. So I really want to thank my guests for joining me for this panel discussion, and to draw just from them the solutions, the shifting of power for gender equality.